Hi, my name is Joe Jackson. I'm an interviewer and a broadcaster. And what you're about to hear is one of the 1,400 interviews I did for publications such as the Irish Times, Sunday Independent, Hot Press Magazine, and for RTE Radio 1. How do I know that there are 1,400 interviews exactly? Because I recently digitized all the damn tapes myself. But please remember that many of the interviews were done for the print media and recorded on cassette tapes. So some are, let's say, sonically challenged. But sometimes sonic considerations should give way to historical significance, I believe. And I'm glad to say that at least some powers that be in RTE Radio 1 agreed with me on this, and broadcast between 2015 and 2018 many of my interviews in a series called The Joe Jackson Tapes Revisited. What follows is one such program edited for this podcast and minus music, which I can't use for copyright reasons. The full tapes can be accessed at joejacksoninterviewer.com. Either way, enjoy. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, nearly every bedsit party you went to during the 1970s had one or all of these LPs. Tea for the Tillerman by Cat Stevens, Tapestry by Carole King, and either or both Sweet Baby James and Mudslide Slim on the Blue Horizon by James Taylor. I own them all, excluding Sweet Baby James. But I first became aware of Taylor when I read the credits on the back of another album I loved at the time, Carole King's first LP, Writer. I noticed that James Taylor played acoustic guitar on all tracks and sang the beautifully aching backing vocal on the King classic Going Back. And speaking of backing vocals, who could resist the sound of Joni Mitchell harmonising with Taylor on his version of Carole King's Anthem for a Generation, You've Got a Friend? I certainly couldn't. So 17 or so years later, in 1988, when I heard that James Taylor was in London promoting his latest CD, Never Die Young, and staying at the Halcyon Hotel, I flew myself over at my own expense, as was always the case when I wanted to interview one of my music heroes. But I was not prepared for the fact that James Taylor turned out to be such a bloody fascinating interviewee, or frankly, that he'd be so bloody difficult to interview at the outset. Then again, part of the problem was of my own making. I never believed in the journalistic ploy of keeping one's difficult questions till last. So I kicked off by asking Taylor about a quote he once gave, explaining why he was reluctant to get into self-revelation during interviews. Self-revelation, ultimately in the name of helping others to face similar truths, was always my goal for interviews. So the notion of Taylor holding back in that sense did not fill me with delight. But there's another layer to all this. James Taylor, who was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1948, had his first hit in 1970 with his own song Fire and Rain, and first number one a year later with You've Got a Friend, was when we met at the end of a grueling day of interviews. And tired. Either way, as you'll hear, it took him some time to tune into my, or rather our frequency. But then, apart from the occasional backward step, we hit our stride, like a choppy duet between two dueling guitarists.
Right, I went back to an old quote. You were talking about your unwillingness to go too deeply into self-revelation in interviews. Remember that quote?
I don't remember it, but it's. I suppose it's makes sense. Although, I don't think there's anything that I haven't mentioned yet in an interview that I couldn't. No, I think the main reason is that it's just it's just sort of embarrassing to you always have to strike a balance, I guess. Is that it tends to be a little bit tedious to hear people go on, about themselves and in minute detail. I mean, I don't want to be boring or inappropriately dramatic or
Self-dramatizing.
Well, yeah, sort of. You always one appears to be a lot more self-serving in interviews than you might
Actually
be or self-obsessed or something.
Right. Well, one argument is that kind of the intense autobiographical, encoded in quotes, nature of your songs leads people to have that interest in you, whereas they might not in a performer of a different style.
I see. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
And it's like an occupational hazard.
Well, yeah, it's not really so much a hazard. It's understandable.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
At this stage, yes, I was glad I'd taken an evening course in dentistry, if only because, as you can hear, talking with Taylor to begin with did make me feel like I was pulling teeth out of the mouth of a person with their mouth closed and sitting in another room. Either way, at this point, I hit him with another bland, easy question. I told Taylor that I remembered that during his most recent concert at Dublin Stadium, when someone shouted out, "We love you, James," he responded by simply saying, "Love?" in a way that to me sounded sarcastic. Was it?
Oh, I didn't. That was
No.
just meant to be a joke.
Was it?
Yeah, sure, just entirely a joke. It wasn't.
It wasn't all romantics end up the same way.
No,
Quote
no.
Joni, bitter and questioning. Would you question the
Yeah.
nature of the feelings fans have for you?
No, I don't. I don't question that. I mean, I think that the only thing I would question is if people took their feelings about me too seriously. I think that it's pretty, I mean, basically, I suppose I've tried to express myself in depth sometimes, but basically it's just entertainment. I mean, it's not meant to be any kind of crucial lesson or really pivotal, deep thing. I don't think people should take what I do too seriously, and I try not to take it too seriously myself. It's only rock and roll. At the best, it's only rock and roll.
But music can be central to many people's lives. I mean, it could have been central to your life as when you were younger. When you were young.
Yeah, it is.
It still is.
It is, but it's I still I'm skeptical of people who take it too seriously. I think
It's like you get too near the kind of Mark Chapman, John Lennon area of obsessiveness. Or
well,
danger,
I suppose that's one possible
if it goes too far.
extreme of it. I mean, I get letters from some people who I think are crazy, whose focus on me and compulsion that I'm the center of, seems to me to be inappropriate and not necessarily dangerous.
Yeah.
Occasionally, someone will write who clearly has listened to my songs and has worked it into some really crazy,
Perspective.
distorted sort of meaning to
Yeah.
yourself. It is a little bit reminiscent of Mark Chapman or Helter Skelter and
All right.
Manson and
Yeah.
Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
But-
yeah. Does that frighten you ever? I mean, do you feel I don't want to be part of these forces? This is not healthy, or this is.
I don't. Generally speaking, if I feel someone is, I try not to respond. I just don't. I don't write back and say you've got it all wrong. You shouldn't take it this seriously. It wasn't specifically directed at you, and it's only rock and roll. I just wait for it to blow over.
On the other hand, a more positive reaction is that when listeners kind of get the shock of recognition from your work, where they say you've articulated something that they have long since been trying to articulate.
Yeah, that's. I think that's very reassuring, and it's nice to. It's gratifying for me to hear from people that I've meant something to them, or that I've helped them I've helped clarify in their mind something that they were feeling. But if a woman writes me and says that I'm controlling her menstrual cycle, I get a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's different. Who, as a lyric writer or a songwriter, would have done that for you when you first started listening to music, giving you that shock of recognition in folk and rock and pop, whatever?
I guess Randy Newman, Bob Dylan. It also as a lyric writer, Lennon McCartney, Leonard Cohen, Joni Mitchell.
Going back, we'd say to your childhood and early teens, they would not have been operating. Who then? Like if you wrote your first...
Nobody really that I heard who was really expressing what I was feeling, sort of internally,
Right.
and sort of helped me organize my thinking, or sort of made something coalesce for me in my mind.
In terms of writers of novels or poetry, perhaps beyond just songwriting, would there have been those?
Yeah. Sure.
Such as?
Now these pauses were beginning to make me feel like I was watching a play by Samuel Beckett, say, Crap's Last Tape, or maybe more so in this case, Crap First Tapes. But at this very moment, James Joyce, my favourite Irish writer, came to my rescue in the sense that talking about his books, such as Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, seemed to snap Taylor into a more vocal mode. Maybe after 20 years talking about the musicians who'd influenced him, and this tour promoting his latest CD and talking mostly about music, this simply was more fun for the man.
I guess when I read James Joyce, I identified strongly.
Portrait of the Artist?
Portrait of the Artist in Dublin.
Dubliners too. Yeah. Why?
When I was a kid, I just, they were.
Did you hate the church, Catholicism, and all those things? And
I wasn't.
British?
I wasn't brought up Catholic and didn't have any exposure to Catholicism. And in fact, I suppose James Joyce's writing about it were as much an early exposure as I ever had to it.
So they brought it into focus for you. Those Portrait of the Artist in particular.
Well, no. This by way of saying mostly that the identification that I had was more on just. It wasn't in terms of my feeling about religion, just in empathizing with, feeling as though somebody was expressing things on the same level that I was feeling.
Has this got to do anything with the kind of Oedipal kind of situation? You referred to that once in one of your interviews, that a kind of father-son conflict, or father-son looking for the father, as in, moving now into a Ulysses. Have you read those?
No, I haven't read Ulysses.
But there's the theme too in Portrait of the Artist. There's always that tension, going back to kind of Greek mythology, between the father and the son. Would you have tuned into those?
I'm not aware of statements or feelings that I have about Oedipal conflict as necessarily originating or being particularly clarified by my feelings about Joyce's writing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that those are inevitable central themes in any sort of sensitive young man's thinking. I mean, I think that just is one of the natures of growing up. Part of the nature of growing up.
Isn't it telling how galvanized Taylor became at that point? Now we were on a roll. But let me say something about the next section. When I mentioned that before the interview, Taylor told me that there was nothing particularly traumatic about his childhood, I meant he told me that during our chat about why he was wary of going too deeply into self-revelation, which was a section of the interview I edited heavily for this programme. During that chat, he'd also, quite rightly, gotten a dig at interviewers, and this would later become a point of conflict between us, who seemed to want to talk only about his marriage to Carly Simon, heroin addiction, and the time he spent in mental institutions. But I suggested that many fans may be interested in at least the latter subject, if only because it's well known he wrote Fire and Rain while institutionalised. Either way, here's a potted history of Taylor's life in terms of 2, not 3, of those key areas. In 1965, at the age of 17, having become increasingly disorientated and depressed, James Taylor committed himself to McLean Hospital in Boston, where he was treated with Thorazine, which it said helped restore his sense of time and structure. A year later, while gigging in the Village in New York with his band Flying Machine, James began using heroin and wrote Rainy Day Man about his addiction. In 1969, he committed himself to the Austin Riggs Center in Massachusetts, which explored the influence of cultural and historical factors on psychiatric disorders. A year later, Taylor released Sweet Baby James, which included Fire and Rain, a song that tells of his time in such institutions and tells of the suicide of his friend Suzanne Schneer. Now, back to the interview.
You said there was nothing too extreme or too harsh about your own upbringing when you talked before the interview, but that you didn't have traumas that were in any way excessive, or no more than 90% of young people would have.
I wouldn't think so. No, not that I have access to. There may be. You can't tell how people see things, and you can't tell. There are people I know who have suffered amazing trauma as children and as adolescents, who seem to be quite confident and quite secure and quite well centered at the middle of their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other people who seem to have had everything and who nonetheless seem to be completely lost and not have a sense of self or of center or of direction at all, who seem to be, almost by definition and by nature, seem to be lost. So it's a mystery to me what causes difficulty in people's lives and what makes for strength.
You did do psychoanalysis. You were psychoanalyzed?
No, I've never been psychoanalyzed. I've been in psychotherapy a number of different times in my life, yeah.
Did they help?
No, that's one of the things about psychotherapy. You never know if it's helping or not. It's not one of those things where you go into it and suddenly everything is better, or you discontinue it and suddenly things are worse. It seems to me arguable that I would be in exactly the position I'm in now without psychotherapy. It may well have been a waste of time. I enjoyed it.
But self-analysis has been a pattern in your life always, hasn't it?
Yeah,
working it through your songs now.
Yeah, I suppose so.
And you feel that has helped. If you hadn't had that, perhaps you may be more entangled.
It's something that I feel compelled to do. I don't necessarily defend it. I think that perhaps in my case I'm a little bit too self-involved. It does seem to be something that I'm compelled to do.
Well, in one of your earlier songs, Hey Mister, you did write about the artistic dilemma of a performer who makes a living recycling his traumatic experiences, to quote one article.
Yeah.
Some would say that you are blessed to be able to do that, to have perfect strangers pay good money to hear Fire and Fire and Fire again.
Okay, sorry for the interruption, but yes, there I did say fire and fire and fire again. Obviously, I meant to say fire and rain again and again. And you may wonder why, when I met my hearers, I tended to interrogate them. Well, sometimes I did so just to see if they had feet of clay. Anyway, back to James Taylor and my suggestion that he was, in a way, blessed that people would pay to hear him sing fire and fire and fire again.
Yeah, it's true. They say that anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but
I hope it is.
I think the ways that I'm not saying that suffering is art or that art needs you to suffer, but I am saying that often the way that we respond to adversity is can be very creative, and it can be, adversity can be a great motivation, and finding your way out of things or dealing with things. I think that's music can be either remedial or celebratory. Right. Either way, some people do different things.
So you're using what could be a destructive force in a kind of positive, hopefully constructive way.
You're engaging a constructive force in dealing with something that's negative, perhaps, and if you can exhibit that somehow or express it, it can mean a lot to you or to other people.
On a personal level, on Baby Boom Baby, who did the lyric for that?
Myself and Zach Wiesner, yeah.
Right.
Zach and I wrote Rainy Day Man too, and he played bass in the Flying Machine, and an old and dear friend of mine. Yeah.
All right, okay. Yeah. Well, one of the lyrics is kind of saying that drag out the past just to paint it blue again. On a personal level or an emotional level, mightn't all that reliving of old pains keep you locked at its mercy rather than help you rise above it?
Well, I think to a certain extent it's true, yeah. If you're successful, especially if you're successful at doing something, people it tends to freeze you at that moment a little bit, and I'm aware of that.
Could it not be emotionally damaging though too?
Well, I suppose a lot of things are emotionally damaging. I don't think that you can really be damaged past the age of 7. I don't know why I feel that, but I just don't. I think that if you survive long enough, things can't damage you. Just can't be damaged by things like that.
So you definitely believe in child being father to the man. The early years shape it all.
Yeah, I do. I do tend to believe that what happens early in your life, and in some cases on a cellular sort of genetic level, very much dictates who you're to be, and that that you pretty much got your whole hand dealt to you by a pretty early age. You might find inventive and creative ways, or might be pre-armed or pre-equipped with inventive or creative ways of dealing with whatever your hand might be. But
would you say then that people are genetically predisposed to depression or schizophrenia or neuroses, or those things that is?
I think that there are genetic predispositions to those things, and it's very difficult to know where behavior and genetics and where they diverge, and it just seems so whimsical and happenstantial, a hazard, sort of hazardous a kind of a thing, just like a toss of a coin, whether people will rise or sink under a certain burden or a certain in the face of a certain test. Just no way to know.
Do you feel you were genetically predisposed to depression?
I have felt that.
It started quite young.
Well, I don't think. I think depression is a response to something. I don't think that it is something in itself. I think that it's a way of coping with something. I think it's unfortunately it's a way of closing down, of shutting down, and it indicates that there is something on an emotional sense. I suppose that on a brain chemistry sort of level, there may be such things as physiological depressions. Someone who who just has who doesn't have enough norepinephrine or something in there. Who knows what the brain chemical is, but I think from on an emotional level, I think that if people are depressed, to me, it indicates that there's something that they're incapable of coping with and incapable of getting rid of at the same time. Sort of a resident conundrum.
Yeah.
That requires that sooner or later requires them to shut down, and they do.
But a manic depression is someone reacting to perhaps something that isn't. You know, I mean, a legitimate depression is a reaction to a stimulus that's there, which is healthy.
To me, a neurotic condition of depression indicates reacting to something that was perceived sometime in the past, but which no longer is appropriate. Right. That's what makes it neurotic. I think if someone is under a present situation in which they can't cope, but something that is actually happening in present time.
Right.
You know, the death of someone who they love, withdrawal from a drug they've been addicted to, stress because of an attack of some sort, you know, something very much present and identifiable in their life, then I don't think it's a neurotic reaction for them to, then it's just cause and effect.
But you became depressed, with say, in school, didn't you? And you signed yourself into a mental hospital when you were in your mid-teens.
Yeah.
Were they to a natural stimulus at the time, or would they have been the other kind of influences you've just mentioned?
I think a combination of the thing. Yeah, the two.
And you fought back by starting to write songs? At that stage, did you?
Yes, that's right. I think it's about that time that I started to write songs. And I think that to a certain extent, those early songs were either a way of escaping or a way of escaping from those feelings, or a way of expressing them.
Do you ever regret that you admitted that a lot of the earlier songs were written when you were in a mental institution, that it stigmatized
Well, they
you?
weren't. A lot of only a couple of songs were written actually in a mental institution. You know, it's one of the things about, again, we started by talking about the nature of a celebrity press, or, you know, this type of interview. I think one of the things about it is that one tends to try to find things in your own life to offer in an interview situation which will be of interest and which will seem sensational, you know. So you tend to, again, focus on things like drug abuse or emotional difficulty or stuff. You know, I just don't think of any of it as really being that big a deal.
Yeah. But to people who are, as I said earlier, my argument earlier was to people who are tuning into your songs on that level, that's the James Taylor they know and the James Taylor they care about and are interested in. You know, be they the heightened moments of reality, such as we're discussing now.
Yeah.
And especially if they are the moments that then led to the art of the song or the music. You know, it legitimizes. It's not. I think sensationalist might be an unfair word. You know what I mean? I think it's a craving for two people to communicate it. One to communicate through another one to an audience or readers.
Yeah.
If you've real interest, as I have in what I'm doing, you know, rather than trying just to get sensational material which can be used in another way.
All right. No, I certainly will grant you that. I agree that it is. But back to your question, which was, do I feel as though I set myself up by admitting that?
Or stigmatized.
Yeah, I have felt that. Okay. I have felt that in concentrating on that, people had an inaccurate view of who I was.
They see the you that was then 22 years ago.
Well, you know, and also I tend to have been sort of typecast as sort of relentlessly introspective and you know, super sensitive, or
wounded, romantic.
I don't think that's that people who know me well personally would describe me that way.
Okay, the regressive dimension to fame you referred to when you said you become a spoiled child when you become a pop star. Remember you said that?
No, I can't remember saying that, but I think there's a
truth in it.
There's a certain amount of truth to it, I suppose.
Okay, would that mean then that you and many of your contemporaries might be emotionally, intellectually, or psychologically immature?
I suppose it depends on how you're going to judge it.
By whose standards and by
what
criteria?
Whose standards. I mean, you know, the standards that seem to maintain now in Western culture are not very high, you know, in terms of emotional maturity or how evolved people are, or how much of a model there is for people to actually become adults and to try to achieve some kind of continuity in their lives and some sort of cohesion between you know.
So you think we've all regressed to
Yeah,
a
sure.
lower state of judging? Or
Well, you know, I've never lived in another time, so I couldn't really say for sure. But you don't see very many role models, at least in the United States, and certainly not in popular culture in the United States. You don't see. There's not access to much in the way of
people of substance.
well, of how to really progress, or you know, yeah, those just aren't at this particular point.
Right.
Those aren't values those aren't attributes that are judged very valuable. What's judged valuable now is action and youth and action, youth, beauty, and sex, and you know, those are, and money, and you know, and power, and those are valuable things. There's no doubt about it. They're compelling. You know, all of those things.
The first brace of those things could be listed as a consequence of the advent of rock culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, you know, rock culture isn't only about those things.
But it shifted a focus onto those things which wasn't there before in our society or in any society, onto youth, sex, speed, action.
Oh, I don't know that they weren't in any society. I don't know what it was like in the declining years of the Roman Empire, but
Well,
my
maybe,
guess is it would be pretty much similar. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'd agree with that. All right.
But I'm, you know, I don't want to come off being too puritanical here. I'm just making a statement. I'm not making a judgment about it. I think sex, drugs, and rock and roll are great. I stuck with them as long as I possibly could, and I intend to stick with sex and rock and roll. You know.
Yeah. Okay. You intend to stay with sex and rock and roll.
Yeah.
You can't disassociate one from the other, can you?
No. Well, you can't. You know, sex is everything. Sex is everything and is in everything. I mean, it's the life and it's the life force and motivation. No, you wouldn't want to. But you know, but one doesn't want to become when I speak in a disparaging way of people's preoccupation and compulsion with sex. I actually mean the way they limit their experience of what is sexual in this world and what it is. I mean, if sex may be the close, you know, only everything is everything. No other single thing is everything. Right. But sex, of all the single things there are, comes the closest to being everything that any other single thing does. You know, if only everything is everything, sex is the next closest thing to being everything. But I think, you know, people have a very narrow fixation on what sex is, and they just return to that over and over again with a sort of a single-minded, simplistic, repetitive kind of narcotic, addictive, you know, repetition. You know, it's much more. You know?
To basically the act of coupling or the act of...
yeah, I guess basically to fucking or to an allusion to fucking. You know, a certain approach to it, kind of first kiss mentality, you know, over and over and over again. I'll tell you, there's something about narcotic culture, you know, pop culture, which I acknowledge that I'm a part of. You know, I know that I'm a part of it, and I'm only going to judge it so much. But there's something about it that turns, you know, we are. One way of looking of us or organizing our thinking about ourselves is that we are sensory combinations of sensory apparatus that navigates through life, and that we use our senses and our perceptions and our ways of being conscious of things. I think those things somehow were meant to contribute all together to a sort of perhaps to a consciousness of who we are or what the world around us was. Or to at the very least, to help us navigate through life and through the world, you know. Right. But we as collections of sensory organs in a narcotic culture and pop culture context, these things are just looked as receptors that are to be fired off as often as possible. I mean, if I go to see a movie and I feel as though I'm being my emotional connection with it is just something that is being prepared and then fired off, and then prepared and fired off with a certain sort of pornographic frequency, you know. Okay, well, he can recover in 5 minutes and then we'll do it again. Right. And then he'll recover in 15 minutes from this kind of catharsis and we'll do it again. You know, it turns those sensory things into the end in themselves. just something that is fired off over and over again, you know.
So he thinks that's what has fed into our limiting the potential of what sexuality really is or could be or should be.
That's one of the things that happen. It happens with sexuality, but it also happens with sort of emotional. When we watch a television show or a movie, you know, more and more the things that we are offered are just ways of stimulating and firing off these sensory responses.
It could be also seen as elements of control.
Well, you know, that's the point. That's the whole point. It takes us away from living by preoccupying all of those senses.
A nostalgia or yearning to go back is a recurrent theme in your work. Do you?
I suppose I must, yeah.
To a time of greater innocence or what? To childhood itself?
I suppose that in this most recent album, you're thinking about Runaway Boy.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a return to childhood or just a wish to sort of reclaim more time, you know, for personal reasons, to lead a life that seems more connected to a meaningful reality, rather than just a succession of engaging requirements or you know, say a succession of things that sort of draw your attention and eat your time. You know, I don't. That's how you have your life completely eaten up.
Right.
It's going from one thing that you try to cope with to another, you know, from one engagement to another.
Would you ever yearn to go back to childhood?
No, I don't think
You
so.
don't, but many people do have that kind of
Well, you know,
intrinsic yearning.
no, what my yearning for is to get out of childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite to the contrary.
Well, that was the question I was
I don't want to go back. I want to come forward.
Yeah, because many people tend to idealize the past. A nation can do it, a country can do it, America could be doing it at the moment, and forget the pain. You know, yearn to go back to days of what is called greater innocence and forget, but these are the days that fucked us up, or me up.
Yeah, oh, no doubt about it. And I agree. America has sort of had an orgy of denial for the past 8 years. But no, I feel as though one of the things that one can hope for as you get older is that your life becomes more about what your own choices are, what your own decisions and your own the things that you've arrived at are, and it becomes less and less about the sort of initial hand that you were dealt. You know.
You once seemed angry that your parents seemed to force you to perform or to be a performer.
Oh, I don't think they forced me. I don't know where I might have given that impression, but I'm sorry that that's the case. No, they were extremely tolerant about.
Were they?
Oh, I see what you mean by perform. No, I hadn't meant that in terms of performance art.
Yeah.
I think that if I said that, I meant in terms of
acting for the mother to win her affection. Was that the context?
It may have been.
Yeah. When your father was away.
I didn't mean so much performing. I think I meant behavior.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, in other words, that the important thing is how you behave and what your effect on other people is, rather than something more personally or self-affirming.
But it ties in with what you were saying, like that your actions or your acting was dictated by the fact that you were trying to please or trying to win acceptance or love from.
Well, I think that's a certain
you could extend
amount of
that into an audience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Some
right.
performers, if you want to use that word, look on the audience as an extended family.
No, I think that's entirely true. That one of the things that goes into making a performer's sort of personality can quite easily be that need for, you know, that constant insatiable need for approval and to be validated by other people expressing approval of them.
Yeah.
You know.
Lenny Bruce joked about it, that everyone's going around saying, "Hey, look at me, ma, or look at me, dad."
Yeah.
You know, for what he was doing, he admitted at 41 he was stood up there on stage and
well, I think we all do it forever, you know, but it's a matter of balance, like all things, you know.
But shouldn't there come a point where you don't have to, you can just look in the mirror and say, "Hey, look at me"?
Well, again, it's a matter of balance.
But you're not, or you wouldn't still be tap dancing for your mother's affection or whatever now.
Well, I'm sure I am. I mean, I'm sure that makes that would be an early model of what I am doing now, to a certain extent. No, I don't think, that's what I mean to say. I don't think we ever completely come away from that.
But you're more in control now. You would be more in control of the impulse to do that now than allowing it to be dictated by back there, one would hope.
Yes, I think so. You know, or at least you find a version of it that works in the present.
Yeah.
I mean, we may still be those same people forever, you know, that we were back then. It's just that we're larger and more powerful and then we become more evolved and, you know.
That, I for one certainly hope is true. Namely, that we continue to evolve until the day we die, if not beyond it. And by the way, I usually did have a very tightly structured, typed out set of questions for these hot press Q&A interviews, which I rather pretentiously saw as one-act, two-hander plays complete with conflict. But when I met someone as fascinating as James Taylor, I went with the flow. But next up, I did ask him a question I had typed out, and I hope it doesn't offend any listener. I asked if there was an element of self-romanticization to his decision to institutionalize himself.
Okay, there was one accusation. I don't that kind of that whole that it was fashionable and hip to kind of to sign oneself into a mental. It was very romantic. The romantic poet. Was there ever an element of the pose to it? Your own perception of what a
No, I think it was an important thing for me to do at the time, and I think that it was justified.
yeah.
I worried about it as being just a way of sort of copping out. I don't think I ever looked at it as an attractive thing to do.
Right.
But I did at that time worry about it as a cop out.
Would you have seen your exploration of drugs as the same?
I think in the beginning drugs were exhilarating, and I thought of them as my friend, and they actually even may have been my friend. I mean, I don't think that's a very popular thing to say now, nor do I in any way encourage people to take drugs or experiment with them. But in the beginning, they were a thrill for me and a great relief. And then shortly after that period of time, they became a real waste of time. I mean, I think I wasted a good 10 years just, treading water at best. I'm lucky I didn't ruin my health. But
If your children came back to you and said, "How can you justify the claim that drugs could be a friend?" or if they took a similar path, how would you as a father feel?
I don't know. I would feel that it was most unfortunate if or when either of my children decides that they, decides. It's not a decision you sort of consciously make. I think
Right.
I'll become a heroin addict. I mean, but
Not strategic either.
no, it's not a very, not if you have any sense at all. But I would think that would be unfortunate, but not unbelievably unlikely. I mean, it's that drugs are everywhere, much more available and much more acceptable now, much more sort of pressure, peer group pressure, as they call it, for kids to take drugs. And I don't know how
You would react.
I would or will react.
Would you feel you had failed as a father in any way?
I've told my kids that I think it's likely that they'll be exposed to drugs and that they'll experiment with them, and that my experience of them is that they're a waste of time and that they're dangerous to play around with. But that these are things people have to find out for themselves, and the most important thing that I would hope is that they would continue to communicate with me about them, and not let them not let drugs turn them away from me. I think they understand that things have gotten a lot better for me and for us as
Family.
as a family in my recovery from drugs. I think I think that's probably the most worthwhile thing I can offer them, is that I just don't do it.
Was there a moment? Was there an experience which made you say in one?
No,
Sharp.
there were many such moments.
Okay.
There were 10 years, there were 15 years of such moments, and there comes a point where it becomes. Finally, it gets hammered into your head that what you're doing is not fun.
This was kind of cocaine, opium.
I've been mostly an opiate addict.
Yeah.
Yeah, for my career. Opiates,
Was there an element of the anesthetic,
no doubt about it.
moving beyond the kind of time in the institution into high fame or whatever, to just dull everything, to escape, to get away from it, to not feel it?
I don't know. No, I think what I was seeking was comfort and not oblivion.
And it ceased being fun when it moved from one to the other.
Well, no, it just there are a number of there are numerous things. There's only one thing about drugs that are good, and that's that it has a sensation of relief for one, perhaps euphoria, perhaps comfort, but of relief of some sort. And there are many things about it that are bad. I think the worst thing of all is that it's just a waste of time, that you never do anything.
What about in terms of creativity? Did you do anything? Did you write many of your songs with many of the lyrics we all know?
Lots of them were written high.
So, and you're saying that was that a waste of time?
Who knows what would have happened without them?
Well, I mean, you've been writing since then without them.
Well, but I'm not writing as an 18-year-old man without them.
True. Yeah.
As a 20-year-old. I mean, I don't know what, you know, I can't rewrite what happened to me, and I can't
Yeah.
change what my life was or has been, nor would I want to. I mean, if I got rid of those, perhaps I would have court some other form of disaster. So.
Would your father have regarded it as a failure that you were using those, or that you signed yourself into an institution?
I think he must. I've always assumed that he must have, on some level, have wondered about what his part in it might have been. But
Sure.
I've had successes in other areas,
Mm-hmm.
too, and I think he might feel proud of those.
Would you have talked with him about that? Did you have good communication?
No, not terribly good communication. I think that may have been one of, could easily have been a contributing factor. But it's not only communication with them; it's communication within yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Being able to actually recognize and accept things. I think that you can't communicate with other people about problems until you can sort of isolate them or recognize them or accept them in yourself. At least be conscious of them on some level. I think that's the first step to trying to communicate something. Not only, and not just going to somebody with a problem.
Because I've seen you described as rock's equivalent of Keats.
That's nice.
Yeah. Were you ever in love with Eastful Death?
I don't know it.
No, that's the quote of the poem, where it's kind of the romantic image of the poet, suicide being a very attractive
Peaceful death.
alternative.
No, I know. I don't. I thought that it was a quote of Keats, but I don't know.
Oh, it is a quote. Yeah, I have been half in love with Eastful Death. He wrote it to Fanny Braun, or his lover. Would you have ever been attracted to that impulse to suicide?
I think everybody contemplates suicide at one time or another. Don't you think? I suppose there are some people who don't.
Yeah. And did you?
Yeah, when I was a kid, when I was an adolescent.
In a serious way, or the way, as you say, most
Well,
of us do?
it was serious enough to frighten me. I'm not sure how in how much peril I was. I mean, I did do something about it other than kill myself.
Asher, there's nothing like having a light-hearted chat with one of your pop heroes. And if you're thinking this is nothing like a light-hearted chat, then listen to this little exchange.
Yeah, we're getting to the last application. You're getting tired. How are you feeling?
I'm doing great. This is fun for me.
Okay, good.
So, you see, that was fun to James Taylor, whose sense of humour obviously is as mad as mine. But the man clearly didn't have fun later when I finally raised the subject of Carly Simon. He'd said he believes it's better to have had multiple romantic and sexual relationships rather than, say, settle down and marry at 18. So I asked him,
Were you too young when you married Carly Simon? Were you both too young, or were you both too caught up in the lifestyle?
I think I was too young. Not necessarily in terms of my the amount of time that I've been on the planet, but just in terms of my own development. I was too unconscious.
Was that the contributory factor to the breakup of the marriage?
I don't know.
You can't say.
Can't say.
Did you learn from the failure to reapply any to your current marriage?
I hope so.
Was it a learning process at the end? A painful process, but a positive in the end?
Yes, I like to think so. Sure.
Are you still friends?
Am I friends with Carly?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that we were friends. No, I tend to want to have as little contact with her as possible, and I assume that the feeling's mutual. We communicate somewhat about the kids, and that's it.
Yeah. It ended up that bitterly?
I wouldn't say it's terribly bitter.
Yeah.
I just think that it ended, and I prefer to have very limited contact with.
It would strike a lot of people as quite sad, those people who had kind of an idealized vision of romantic lovers in the early 70s and held up certain couples who were in the public eye as, Christ, if we could be like them or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's their problem. That's their problem.
With their idea.
I'm not interested in
distorted perceptions.
I'm not interested. Well, distorted perceptions are interesting. I'm not interested in living my life in any way to accommodate people's distorted perceptions of what romantic love is or should be in other people. Although the song "Never Die Young," is definitely a myth, and a song is about a person who is mythologizing a couple.
Right.
That's what the song is about. Somebody who has a huge investment in this couple being what they feel they never can be.
Yeah, and you feel that many kind of fans or admirers of people can push those pressures on couples who are in the public eye.
Oh, yeah, to a certain extent. I think I don't think life takes place in the public eye.
Yeah, and it can be damaging if it does.
Yeah, just a drag. I don't think damaging really is what you'd call it either.
Well, there are those couples who do claim that the fact that they had to live out their love affair in the spotlight, the glare of cameras or television cameras or whatever, didn't help.
I think it must be very distracting.
Your relationship with Carly wasn't like that?
No, I think ours was like that.
Was like that?
Yeah. But, I'm reluctant to talk about Carly. She can talk about herself.
Did she talk about you?
I don't know. I don't read her press.
If ever I heard a self-conscious laugh, that was it. Though 15 minutes later, after the interview ended, Taylor clarified one reason he was reluctant to talk about Carly Simon. He felt I should have focused also on his wife at the time, Catherine Walker.
Okay, I can end it there unless you feel there was one point you particularly wanted to mention and the Get hasn't asked me anything.
No, you've covered it all. You've covered it all.
Have I?
I think so.
Sorry about that, Graham, but there you go, 6:45 on the dot.
I didn't get a chance to mention. Unfortunately, we talked a lot about what has happened to me in the past 10 years and in my career and stuff, and we didn't really spend any time mentioning my appreciation and gratitude for my wife. And we mentioned a lot about Carly and stuff, but that stuff is
No, well, I
that's
tried.
10, 15 years ago.
I tried to lead
with
you into
Carly.
that.
And I.
Okay.
I think a lot of where I am now and a lot of what I'm... Oh, yeah, that's right. You did mention.
No, I tried to lead you
Catherine
into
a
it
couple
by
of
saying,
times.
did you learn from that for your current marriage? And I
Right.
thought, and then when you didn't go into that,
I'm sorry. I was
talk
just aware of trying to close down the subject a little bit.
on Carly.
Yeah.
no, but then I thought, well, if you don't talk about Carly, maybe he doesn't want to talk about it, so I didn't push that.
Right.
But if you do, I will integrate it.
In fact, I don't. I agree with you that a discussion of one's a private life can be detrimental to it, and I don't. And for those reasons, I don't like to talk about Catherine and my private life with her. But in terms of balancing it off and acknowledging how important she is to me, the fact is that I have no idea where I'd be without her. And I really, I'm profoundly, profoundly grateful is the wrong way to put it. Really.
It sounds like you've just received an award or
Yeah,
something.
really. But the
What
fact
is an award?
that I depend amazingly on.
Her and the family, is the family unit of central importance now?
By the family, do you mean my siblings and my mother and father? No, it's not really. I think that Catherine is my family as things stand now, and my children.
Right. The second family. So that is over the past 10 or 15 years?
Yeah.
She's given you that kind of...
Well, Catherine and I have been together for 7 years.
7 years.
And it's...
What, James? Give me another quote for profoundly grateful. I can't help it.
All right, I will. Hang on.
Then I'll leave it.
I will.
At that point, as James Taylor reflected on a better quote to give me about Catherine, I said to Graham, who I think was his press agent, and who had sat in at the end of the interview and said he enjoyed what he'd heard.
Well, there were certain areas I was uncomfortable about covering, but I have something to readers who are going to expect things.
Sure.
So I thought if we could just go at them, get them out of the way, and then move on to... But I think we did go into a good analysis of whatever life forces and things like that. That was different. It was different for me.
I thought so
Things
too.
like that.
No, it seemed quite unique.
Yeah, okay. Maybe we put it in the Philosopher's Monthly magazine or something.
Is there a Philosopher's Monthly? Is there or isn't there?
If there isn't, there should be.
That's right. No, I don't know what to say about
Profoundly grateful. Well, maybe it would just be enough to understate it, to say I don't know where I would be. Or
that's
even
right.
that,
that's
you don't
right. Well,
have to go into a kind of almost melodramatic phrase.
Yeah, that's it. Good for you. Okay. Unless you think of something really
good.
Yeah,
You
call
get
me
that
up and
to me
jack it
then.
up with me. I was like, oh yeah. In it goes.
Thanks for listening, and good night. Hi, Joe Jackson here again. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Joe Jackson Interviews podcast. More can be heard on my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com.